Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the next episode of the Empathic Leader Podcast, where we talk all things empathy, emotional intelligence, and leadership. You are going to love my guest today. She is phenomenal. She is a force of nature, and I'm so honored to have her on. Her name is Sophie Lechner, and her LinkedIn has her title as a growth strategist and mission-driven entrepreneur. She's a speaker, author, and business coach who helps mission-driven entrepreneurs turn marketing from a chore into a joy. And I don't know about you, but anyone who can do that is nothing short of doing magic. So massive props to her. So they can attract clients like a magnet instead of chasing them. Her mastery of LinkedIn over the past 20 years has led to global speaking engagements, including Oxford University, the one in the UK, podcast features, and media recognition in Forbes and Authority magazine. She has developed the magnet model, a powerful framework for client attraction, which she shares in her new book, Unlock Your Impact, which just came out this March and has a workbook to go with it. Now, I actually met Sophie at Oxford, and she is phenomenal. She is someone who has been on LinkedIn and done the marketing stuff like from the very beginning and knows this stuff like the back of her hand. So she not only leads herself through being able to figure out new platforms and new things and new ways of doing things, but can also lead others, both with her book and her teaching and her workbook, to be able to better use LinkedIn and the tools, the marketing tools that are out there. So please help me welcome Sophie Lechner. Hi.
Thank you. It's a stroke to the ego to hear you speak like that about me. Thank you. That was very flattering.
Hey, Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller here, and I wanted to let you know that my new book, The Empathic Leader, How EQ via Empathy Transforms Leadership for Better Profit, Productivity, and Innovation, is on pre-sale on Amazon now. Hard copy will come out June 15th, and I'm so excited that this is finally coming to fruition. Please go to Amazon, buy your pre-sale Kindle copy. We'll see you there. Well, it's all true. That's the best part. I mean, you're all that in a box of Triscuits. I'm just saying.
Oh, I love that. That's so cute. I'm really excited to be here because your topic is just so fascinating. And ever since hearing you in Oxford and then, your different talks at Cambridge and all these other places and your podcast, I have been learning so much about empathy, and it's really important stuff we all need to learn about.
Awesome. Well, and I appreciate you saying that very much, because that really is my goal. If we're all talking about it and we're getting the word out there. I mean, I focus on leaders because there's so much good they can do and so much damage they can do. And that's why I feel that that's a perfect place to start. But emotional intelligence and empathy is something we could all do better with, and that including me, and I study it. So, got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah. And it plays a huge role, I think, in entrepreneurship, and specifically, I find for coaches, like all of us who are entrepreneurs, mission-driven entrepreneurs, and who want to help others. Empathy is like, it's the first thing that it's the first thing that drives us. That's the reason why we want to help others. And then it needs to be present, ever present, all the time in our work with our clients.
Yeah, I agree. I could not agree more. So let's actually start there, because I would like to know what kind of empathy brought you into the circles you're in now, because what you're doing, you're really cutting edge. I mean, even though you've been doing LinkedIn for a while, you really know what's working now and how this has evolved and where it's going. So I'd love to know what brought you into this in the first place.
Yeah, so what brought me into all of this, and I didn't realize this until decades later, but it's really the way I was brought up. My parents have an interesting history, which, again, don't realize until later. But my mom was a kid during World War II, and she had a German soldier had commandeered part of their house and was living in their house in France. I need to say that she's French. Was French. And so she used to tell us stories about this German soldier and how they became friends because he was living in the house. And I grew up hearing these stories. And my dad was in Pakistan, a teenager, when he was Pakistani, and when the split between Pakistan and India happened, and Pakistan was actually created. And so he had a lot of Indian friends. And after the partition, they stayed friends. And so I heard all these stories about him and his Indian friends and all of this. And it was all normal to me. And I took it all for granted for many years until I realized, wait, for a French person who grew up during the war to have become friends with a German person and with a Pakistani becoming friends, that's not the norm, actually. You would expect them to have this hatred of the other country and people. And so realizing through all these stories I had grown up with that my parents really modeled for me the fact that the connection with another person is what matters. And it's funny because now my newsletter on LinkedIn is called Connection Matters with the play on words. But
Yeah.
so connection to me is a deep, deep thing that is part of my DNA. And as I mentioned, it was only later that I realized how important of a role it had played for me. And I think that's what, through the years and through my work now, ends up being the one thing that I'm teaching people. I'm helping people to understand the power of connection. I was on a call just before this, and we were talking about marketing strategies and all the things and what the things that entrepreneurs do to get their business off the ground. And she was telling me about all these tactics she had been doing for the last year, but she hadn't been building relationships. And I'm like, yep. So that was backwards. She, was recognizing it and seeing it, and we were talking about it. But because the only thing that matters in your business is to start building relationship. When you're starting your business, is to build relationships, and everything else is bells and whistles. So it's like there's this arch, and I talk about that in my book. This arc, I think is what I'm supposed to say, that takes you from your childhood and all the different decisions you've made, and that lead you to where you are now. And once you discover that, that's really powerful.
Wow. Yes. And that's really true. I mean, I think maybe we don't always recognize the role that our paths play going all the way back, but they do, and who we are now is a result of every step we took along the way.
Yeah, and that's something that I talk about in my book in chapter 6, which presents a tool called the storybook activity, where you go back, and I have, as you mentioned, the workbook, I have all the questions, like you go back through your story and discover or rediscover a lot of times what has led you to where you are now. So you're actually creating for yourself a story similar to the one I've been, giving you right now, which is my story. Because when you go back and discover that, it makes you, it allows you to explain to people how you are unique and how you can help them. And that's, I feel, a much more powerful way of differentiating yourself than, studying all the competitors and doing, tables of what they offer and what you offer, and that's your differentiation. No, that's not powerful. So
No. Well, and it discounts our humanity.
yeah, exactly.
Because at the end of the day, we're just human beings.
Yeah, I always say, differentiation, when people say I need to differentiate, don't look at it as a verb that you need to go and do something positively to differentiate, meaning to make yourself be something else than you are. No, start from who you are, and you are different. And then differentiation becomes something that you explain and that you share, but not something you do.
Yes. Yes. I find it interesting you brought up coaches earlier as well, because one of the things I was talking about on an earlier podcast is how, coaches are fantastic. If it works for pro athletes and it works for pro artists and it allows us to gain traction way quicker and more efficiently than we would on our own, that they're fantastic. But we need to be careful we're choosing the right coach for us. We need to know who we are and what our values are and what we want to embody, because not all coaches are created equal, which is fantastic because we are all different and we need something different. So you connect with that coach that can actually lift you to that higher level. Man, it's like, the heavens opened up. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible when you have the right coach in 10 minutes, even 15 minutes. It can be like, whoa, this part of your brain opens up, and now all of a sudden you can see all these other things. So it's not just what they say, it's what it opens up in you. And I think, that's where the whole thing about empathy comes in, of course, is as a coach, having been on this side of it, I am a coach. I struggle with all the different types of empathy that you explain, the empathy, the sympathy, and all these other things. And it was really amazing to me to hear how you express these differences, because I really struggled with, yes, I believe I have empathy, I have the curiosity and the generosity, and so they kind of interact in a way that is how I make connections with people. So you have to have that connection, but then I easily, because I'm a very emotional being, I easily get into the whole sympathy thing, and then I start to have my own emotional reactions, and I want to help the person, and I get all, and then it becomes quite a tangle. And I struggled with that when I first became a coach, and I've had to find ways to select my clients in such a way that I would not get caught up in these kinds of entanglements, because it would really eat at my energy,
Yes. Well, I think you make a good point there as well, that not every coach is for every client. Well, not every client is for every coach.
Yes, for sure.
And again, that's okay. It needs to be a fit. It's not just a collaboration. It has to be a fit.
Yeah. I remember one client where I had a coaching package at the time that was 12 hours, so an hour a week for 12 weeks. And I don't know how many hours I spent with that client, but she would go on. And I was just like, it was so tragic, all the stuff that was happening, that I was getting all caught up, and I would get in tears, and it would be like, I was not helping her. Well, I mean, I ended up, yes, helping her, but I was so drained by the whole experience. It was terrible. I am not trained to be that kind of person, like a therapist or coach, a life coach. So it was not helpful.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Well, and as someone who does have a lot of empathy, and I actually appreciate that you bring up the differences, because I don't want to, sometimes I feel like I beat the drum on that too much, but it's so important that there's 43 different kinds. The feeling one is only one, that's only a small, the iceberg, there's this much and then there's this much underneath.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I want to see you writing on LinkedIn about this so people can learn about it. 43. I want to see that series of posts of 43 different kinds of empathy. You need to educate the public. The public needs to know. We need to know. So,
well, then I will take your advice on that, because you are the LinkedIn queen. So, which
I can guide you through it.
So having that kind of empathy, trying to lead through that kind of empathy. Let's talk a little bit about some of the self-empathy maybe that you've had to employ to go through all of this. Because I know you've just written a book, and that book you did the launch party last week, and you're top in 7 categories, and like 2 of them, you're neck and neck with Seth Godin, which is...
Call it neck and neck. I'm close.
Well, but still,
I'm on the same screen.
Well, we're bragging. We're bragging where we should.
Yes, yes, yes. Even
Okay,
being in the same sentence is great.
on the same screen with Seth Godin, all the same. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a
Mhm.
lot of stuff to be very proud of. And like your workbook, sometimes you get a workbook that goes along with the book and it's like 4 pages and 3 of them are pictures. And yours is what, like 200 plus pages?
Yes.
You actually get to dig in and work on this, which is
Yeah.
phenomenal. But
Yeah.
writing a book can be very taxing on self-empathy. And
Yeah.
how is this? Is this enough? Am I enough? Am I giving them the right information? Am I going to connect with people? This is information I know will help them. Am I getting it out in a way that's connecting? Can you talk a little bit about your process and how you were actually able to pull this off? Because it's never as simple as, well, I'm going to write a book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things that I would say is that writing a book is all about getting a certain set of ideas from your head where they reside to someone else's head where they will reside and take on their own life, right? So that transmission is not something that is just done through words and sentences we put together, although that's what a book is. What I want to call attention to is that there are principles of instructional design that are especially studied to facilitate that transmission, and following the principles of instructional design to write a book. Now, not a nonfiction or novel, but like a nonfiction book where you are transmitting ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I would highly recommend anybody who wants to do that to look at instructional design. And in my book, I recommend the book by my friend Rebecca, The Course Design Formula. It is written and created, and she teaches it for course creation, but we have discovered together that it's an amazing tool for book writing, nonfiction book writing. And I keep telling her, create a course for that. So we'll see. So that's the first thing, is make sure that the outline of your book will follow instructional design principles so that in the end, it is like a knife through butter. The other thing that I did that I think helped me tremendously was to, as I was developing the ideas in the chapters, I was writing the book, and then I would write those ideas up as a LinkedIn newsletter or an article or post, right? But since it's a book, it's a long form, so newsletter was a better vehicle for that. But I shared my ideas. And when you're writing a book, you're sharing your ideas, but you know that it's going to be a whole body of work, and it's going to take time before it goes into the heads of anybody, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're posting it on LinkedIn, there's this immediacy of time and of people who will be reading it right away. And so for me anyway, what I found is that suddenly changed the whole dynamic of how I was interacting with my ideas. And it somehow made me write them in a bit of a different way. And so I would go through that process. Then I would get all the feedback. And then once I had really played around, like with Play-Doh, with these ideas and the feedback and the discussions, and then went back to the book, I was like, no, now I need to rewrite it a little bit differently. So it sounds like a very protracted process. And sure enough, it took time. But I think having this energy with the reader as I was going really gave depth to the book, and it gave me a way to really be very engaged with it rather than be in my cave,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I find this fascinating because there's as many ways to approach this as there are authors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you find that writing your book at all took a greater connection to yourself, or did you find that the book came out of a connection with yourself, or both?
Oh my God, what a fantastic question. Because the first part of your question, I was like, yes. And then the second part, I'm like, yes. But then you're like, what about, yeah. So, yes, overall is the average answer. But no, yes, that was what I enjoyed one of the things I enjoyed the most about the book was just this whole process of going deeper into my own thoughts. This sounds a bit self-centered, and I have to admit it was very self, focused. But developing, like, we all have ideas, but going through the process of really parsing them out and going through the process of having to explain them, and then going back and saying, well, yeah, but actually I need to differentiate between these two concepts, and then split it up again. And, it's like a bit of hair splitting, but that whole intellectual exercise I found extremely satisfying, very rewarding, very, pleasing, pleasureful. I don't know what word to use, but, I really enjoyed it, is bottom line. And to answer your question, I think it really helped me to get much closer in touch with who I am and what it is I want to say. And in fact, I started my whole process writing a book about LinkedIn. And then I realized, nah, I found myself just doing a how-to, click here and write a thing of this many words. And then it was like very tactical. And I was like, no, I need to write something much deeper. So I set that as first. I tried to change it, but then I was like, no, this is no. So I set it aside and started off again. And I think that's when I started writing about marketing, which is much broader. And some people tell me it's not about marketing; it's even broader than that. It's deeper than that. Whatever. But that's when I really was able to. It changed my identity, I think, at that point.
Wow. I mention it because in creating that connection with yourself, because empathy isn't about feeling, it's about connection, right? Mm-hmm. Connection and understanding. To create a greater connection and understanding with yourself through your writing, through your thoughts, through what you did. Number one is phenomenal, like you were talking about, but number two takes a lot of courage, because sometimes you never really know what's going to float to the surface. You're bringing all these thoughts in, and you're trying to expand this and do it in a way that's going to connect with other people through the connection with yourself. And it's a process. It really is.
Yes. Yeah. And I have to say, there were times where I was just surprised that my writing was almost like I would have an idea and say, okay, this is what I'm writing about. And I think that's the idea. And then I would start writing it. And then I would find myself with something much longer written that had more ideas in it than I knew I was going to write when I started. It sounds crazy, but it was almost writing itself. So I would have not a prompt, the words now overused with ChatGPT, but like I'd start with an idea, and then it grew, and the way to express it just came to me, and then I would test it with the LinkedIn. So it was really fun, I have to say.
Cool.
And connection is everything that I'm about. That's what I preach. That's the the soapbox I get on. And so having that connection with the reader was so important for me. And that's why when I got my first reviews, I had tears in my eyes, because that connection had become real, right? So there was a real person on the other end I was really connecting with. So it's lovely.
Yeah. Well, the flip side of that too is, in order to do this, you have to show self-leadership, leadership of one. I mean, you are already a thought leader, and you're leading others through your coaching and through what you're doing. But to be able to lead yourself, I mean, that's a really different set of skills. And to say, I'm going to write a book, that's a very long-term goal. That's something that a lot goes into it. When you finish, you're not the same as when you started it.
Yes.
So that ability to lead yourself into this and complete it is pretty massive. Is there anything that you can tell us about your process with that? Or if you've even thought of it in those kind of terms?
Yes and no. I think I did not necessarily think of it that way. I mean, once I start something, I usually will, get it done. But there were times where I was like, this is just taking so long and so long. But I know I was not making enough progress at one point. And I'm a pretty impatient person. So once I decided to write the book, I wanted it to be out in people's hands like the next week. So that for me was the hardest part, is taking the time. So once I started to really enjoy it, then it became its own end, and that was better. But what I learned along the way is that, and I shouldn't have been surprised, because it wasn't really a new thing for me. I knew this about myself. I just hadn't applied it to this, is that I'm not really good at doing so many things at once. I can, but then they don't necessarily get finished. So this thing that I was doing was just going on and on and on, and just not really moving forward the way I wanted it to. So at one point in April of 24, I said, okay, now I'm really going to finish this. And I almost stopped everything else I was doing. So I didn't have as many clients for a little while, because I was really going into my cave. And then I created a whole timeline for myself, because I was just tired of it going forward without, having a deadline and all of this. So I created a whole detailed timeline for myself. And then I just continued until it was done. And I modified it once to incorporate the beta reader feedback, but that was it. Then I was just on a path, and I had to follow it.
Wow. See, I think that's important to recognize as well. I mean, self-leadership, again, there's as many kinds as there are people leading themselves. So to get a glimpse into your process and how you do it and how you did it, I think is educational for the rest of us. Because again, I mean, writing a book, it's a process. It's
a long task. It's a long task. And you talk about self-leadership. It's true. You can't exercise self-leadership until you know yourself, same way that you can't lead people until you know yourself and them. So recognizing your own process, like in the beginning, so many people were telling me, because I was like, oh, I'm not moving forward. Oh, book a half hour every morning and write your book. And I was like, that is so not working for me. It takes me half an hour to even think that I'm going to write my book. And then, another half hour to remember what I was thinking last time I sat down. So that was just like, no, that doesn't work for me. So I knew that I needed to have a minimum of 4 to 5 hours free ahead of me, which, in the way we lead our lives does not happen. That's why the book was not happening. So once I cleared my calendar, that's when I was able to do it. But so you have to know how you operate so you can lead yourself, like you said.
Yeah, you really do. That self-reflection and self-awareness and self-empathy, it all feeds in together. It's not like there's this bucket of self-awareness and this bucket of self-empathy and this bucket of self-leadership. It's all in this tangled ball.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why we need people like you to untangle it for us and help us to, figure this out. Yeah.
Well, we're all on the same path trying to figure it out. So the good news is we're all in the boat together. Sophie, where can people find you?
Right. So you can go to my website, which is themagnetmodel.com. There's a lot of stuff there. You can go to LinkedIn, Sophie Lechner. So linkedin.com/in/Sophie Lechner. And there are a whole bunch of mini lessons in there in my featured section on things you can do to improve your LinkedIn or, generally leverage LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And you can read my book, Unlock Your Impact, the Roadmap to Magnetic Client Attraction for Entrepreneurs Who Hate Marketing. And it's available on Amazon, hopefully soon on other platforms, but for now, just on Amazon.
Which is amazing. This has been phenomenal. I have one question to wind things up with. So if you can think of one person, alive or dead, known or unknown, that has influenced you and your leadership style, both for yourself and for others, who would it be and why?
So there are quite a few people, but the lady behind me is Audrey Hepburn. And I'm a huge fan. I've seen all her movies. This is just one picture of her, but you can see on the other side, there's another one, and she's all over around me. I have huge admiration for this person who is sadly dead, died in 93. But she epitomizes for me not only simplicity and elegance, how she's my model of what beauty is for a woman, but also just modesty. And modesty is not the right word because I'm thinking of the French word modest, but just, self-effaced, very simple, to the point, not the glamour of the 50s, so she's like represents the opposite of the 50s glamour. Not that I don't like 50s glamour as well, but and she was a very giving person. She led a life where she put her own life and raising her kid and all this as a priority in front of her. Sadly for us, she could have made many more movies. And she was very, very active with UNICEF for helping with children in poverty around the world. And so she's very much a role model for me.
That's fantastic. And that's the perfect reason. I mean, to pull your inspiration from someone like that who really did lead herself and lead others through her actions and just her behavior. She led by example.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. Sophie, thank you so much for joining us today. And we appreciate your wisdom and your input on all of this. And to the audience, please check her out on LinkedIn. Check out her book. Connect with Sophie. She's about connection. So connect.
Yes, I welcome all connections, and I love to get on coffee chats with people. So if anybody is inspired, just shoot me an email. Oh, I didn't give my email. Sophie@themagnetmodel.com. And we'll get on a coffee chat. I love those.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. This has been phenomenal. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment so we can keep this conversation going. And I will see you here next week for the next episode of The Empathic Leader.